The quiet bond that no one saw coming. It began on a silent evening in Lowe's Angels, long after the film crew had packed up and the bright studio lights had faded. Keanu sat alone on the edge of the empty soundstage, still wearing the black jacket from his last scene. The air around him felt heavy, not from exhaustion, but from something deeper. He looked at the floor, quietly thinking about the people he worked with, the faces that came and went through his life like passing stars. There was something about this film, something about the people he was working with, that stirred emotions he couldn't easily explain. Earlier that day, during a quiet break between takes, one of his co-stars had approached him, a young actress who had been nervous since the first day of shooting. She looked up to Keanu not just as a star, but as someone who carried peace inside him. Her hands trembled when she spoke, but Keanu had noticed. He always noticed. When everyone else rushed for coffee or checked their phones, he stayed behind, talking softly to the people who needed it most. She told him she wasn't sure she was good enough, that the pressure of Hollywood was starting to crush her spirit. Instead of giving advice, Keanu just listened. His calmness was his answer. Then he said something she would never forget. "You don't have to prove yourself to anyone. You just have to be real. That's what lasts." Those words sank deep. She later said it was the first time someone in Hollywood made her feel like she belonged. That evening after the wrap, Keanu stayed longer to help a lighting technician who was struggling with heavy cables. No one asked him to. It wasn't part of his job. Yet there he was, a man who had earned millions, lifting equipment in silence, smiling at the tired crew, saying thank you before he left. Someone caught that moment on a small phone camera. They posted it online without any caption. Within hours, it spread across social media. People thought it was just another act of kindness from Keanu Reeves. But this time, the story behind it would change everything. The next morning, when he arrived on set, something felt different. People looked at him not as a celebrity, but as someone who reminded them what humanity still looked like. His co-stars, veterans and newcomers alike, began sharing their own quiet stories about him. One actor said that when his father was in the hospital, Keanu called just to ask how he was doing. Another said Keanu once gave up his own trailer so a crew member could rest after fainting in the heat. These weren't rumors. They were pieces of truth, small and sincere. As the days went on, the connection between Keanu and his co-stars grew deeper. They began trusting him with their fears, their memories, their private struggles. Hollywood was known for walls, but somehow he broke them down with simple gestures, listening, helping, respecting everyone equally. One night during a late shoot, a senior actress broke down in tears after a scene that reminded her of her late husband. Keanu quietly sat beside her and didn't say a word. He didn't offer comfort in words, only in presence. Sometimes silence speaks more than speeches, but behind his calm eyes there was also pain. Every person on that set could sense it, even though he never spoke about it. When someone asked how he always stayed so kind despite everything he had been through, he smiled faintly and said, "Because I know how it feels when someone isn't." That single sentence lingered in everyone's mind. They realized his kindness wasn't just a choice. It was a reflection of the battles he had fought and the losses he carried. Yet, instead of bitterness, he chose compassion. It was that quiet strength that began to change not just the people on the set, but even the tone of the entire production. As the film neared completion, Hollywood would soon discover the depth of Keanu's connection with his co-stars. A bond that would lead to a moment no one could have predicted. A moment that would silence gossip, shock the media, and remind the world that true respect doesn't come from fame, but from heart. And that moment was already on its way. When kindness became the message the next morning, the set felt different. People walked in quietly, carrying their coffee cups, speaking in soft voices as if they didn't want to disturb something sacred. After the night before, everyone had started to see Keanu differently. It was no longer about a famous actor doing small, kind things. It was something more, something that touched the heart in ways words couldn't explain. One of the younger actors, Liam, couldn't stop thinking about what Keanu had said. "Because I know how it feels when someone isn't." Those words kept replaying in his mind. Liam had joined the film hoping it would be his big break, but deep inside, he had been struggling. His mother was ill back home, and the constant competition of Hollywood made him feel small and replaceable. When he saw Keanu talking to everyone with the same warmth, from the director to the janitor, he realized fame didn't have to destroy a person's soul. It could make them gentler if they chose it. During lunch break, Liam walked over to Keanu, who was sitting on a wooden box near the cameras, quietly eating a sandwich. Keanu looked up and smiled, gesturing for him to sit. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. Then Liam said softly, "I don't understand how you stay so calm in a place where everyone's trying to be someone else." Keanu took a slow breath. "Because I stopped trying," he said. "Once you stop chasing who you're supposed to be, you start meeting who you really are." Liam smiled, but his eyes were wet. That one sentence changed something inside him. From that day, Liam stopped pretending. He acted with more heart, spoke with honesty, and carried himself differently. Even the director noticed. The whole energy of the set began to shift. It wasn't about competition anymore. It became about connection. The production moved to a new location, a quiet cabin scene in the mountains. The cold wind made filming hard, but Keanu always showed up first, helping the crew prepare. When a heavy storm hit one evening, everyone rushed inside for safety. A young makeup artist slipped on the wet ground, dropping her entire kit into the mud. She covered her face, embarrassed, but Keanu walked over, picked up every single brush, cleaned them with his handkerchief, and helped her gather her things. She looked at him in shock, whispering, "You don't have to do this." He smiled softly and said, "No one has to be kind, we just forget that we can be." That night, word spread again. The cast started sharing these quiet moments online, not for attention, but because it made them believe in something better. Soon, fans across the world began commenting about how different this film felt, as if the spirit of kindness itself had become part of it. One evening, when the crew gathered around a small bonfire after a long day, an older actress named Helen opened up. She had been in Hollywood for 40 years. Her voice trembled as she said, "I've seen people come and go. Fame changes them, but you remind me why I fell in love with this work, not because of money, but because of people." Keanu didn't say anything grand. He just nodded and said, "We're all just stories. The only thing that matters is how we treat each other while we're still being written." Those words hit everyone in silence. They looked into the firelight, each thinking about their own choices, their own lives. And for a moment, Hollywood didn't feel like a race. It felt human again, but not everyone was happy about this change. One of the producers started to feel uneasy. He worried that the attention was shifting away from the film's budget and publicity toward Keanu's quiet influence. He called a private meeting and said, "We're here to make a movie, not a movement. I don't want the crew distracted by emotional stories." When Keanu heard that, he didn't argue. He simply said, "If being human is a distraction, then maybe we're forgetting what art is for." The producer had no answer. Days passed, and something remarkable began to happen. The co-stars started helping each other off-screen too, sharing food, visiting one another's families, and listening without judgment. What began as small gestures grew into a bond that the media couldn't explain. Then came the day that changed everything, a day that would shock not only the people on set, but the entire Hollywood community. It started with a letter, a handwritten note that arrived for Keanu during filming. The assistant brought it to him quietly. Keanu opened it slowly, his face still, his eyes moving gently across the lines. When he finished reading, he sat back silent. The director asked if everything was all right. Keanu nodded, though his expression said otherwise. He folded the letter carefully and placed it inside his jacket. Then he stood up and asked for a few minutes alone. He walked to the edge of the mountain trail, looking out at the fading light. No one knew what was in that letter. Not yet. But it would become the turning point, the moment that revealed a truth so personal, so unexpected, that Hollywood itself would stop and listen. The quiet man everyone thought they knew was about to open his heart in a way the world had never seen before. The letter that opened old wounds, the morning sun, fell softly over the mountains as the crew prepared for another long shoot. The air was cold but peaceful, filled with the sound of wind moving through the trees. Yet deep inside, everyone could feel something heavy in the air. Keanu had barely spoken since receiving that letter the day before. He moved quietly through the set, kind as always, but there was a sadness behind his eyes that no one could miss. The director tried to focus everyone on work, but even he kept glancing toward Keanu, worried. During the first break, Liam approached him gently and asked, "Was it bad news?" Keanu gave a faint smile. "It was something I needed to remember," he said softly. That was all. But later that afternoon, while everyone was setting up for a night scene, Keanu called the cast together. His tone was calm, but there was something in his voice that made everyone stop what they were doing. They gathered around him, actors, assistants, camera crew, the whole team. Keanu held the folded letter in his hand. The paper looked worn, like it had been touched many times. He took a deep breath before he began to speak. "This letter," he said quietly, "is from someone I used to know before any of this started. Before fame, before movies, before all of it. She was part of my life when I was still trying to find who I was. We lost touch years ago. She passed away recently, and her brother wrote to tell me." The crowd fell silent. Some looked down, others held their breath. Keanu continued. "He said that she always kept one picture of me, not from a movie, not from a premiere, but from a day when I helped her carry groceries home when it was raining. He said she used to tell people that moment made her believe that not all kindness disappears when you grow older." He stopped for a moment, looking away, trying to keep his composure. "And now he wrote to tell me that her last wish was for me to keep believing that small things matter, that kindness still matters." No one moved. Even the wind had gone still. It was as if the entire world paused to listen. Keanu slowly folded the letter again and placed it inside his pocket. "I've spent years running from pain, thinking that silence was enough to heal it," he said. "But reading this reminded me that pain doesn't go away. It just teaches you how to love better. Every person you meet is carrying something unseen. That's why it's important to be gentle." His words touched everyone deeply. Helen, the older actress, wiped tears from her eyes. Liam put a hand on Keanu's shoulder and whispered, "Thank you for sharing that." Even the producer, who had once complained about distractions, stood in silence, realizing he was witnessing something rare, truth spoken with no script. That night during filming, something magical happened. The emotion of Keanu's confession seemed to flow into the entire scene. The actors performed like never before, raw, real, and full of heart. One of the cinematographers said it felt like they weren't acting anymore, they were simply living the moment. When the director yelled, "Cut!" no one clapped. They just stood there, tears glistening in the soft light, knowing something extraordinary had happened. Later, as everyone packed up, Keanu sat by himself near the edge of the set, watching the stars rise. Liam joined him quietly. "You know," Liam said, "most people hide their pain, you turn it into peace." "How do you do that?" Keanu smiled gently. "You stop trying to erase it. Pain is like water. If you fight it, it drowns you. If you float with it, it carries you somewhere new." Liam nodded slowly, the words sinking into him like quiet wisdom. A few days later, the studio released a short behind-the-scenes video, a montage showing the cast laughing, helping each other, and working together. Near the end, there was a brief clip of Keanu holding the letter, reading it silently, then smiling through tears. The video wasn't meant to go viral, but it did. People across the world shared it with messages like, "This is what real humanity looks like," and "Keanu reminds us what love feels like in silence." Within hours, news channels picked it up. Journalists called it the most genuine moment in Hollywood history. The studio didn't plan it, but the impact was massive. Even other actors, directors, and fans from different countries began talking about the message behind it. That kindness, not fame, is what keeps art alive. But not everyone took it well. Some tabloids twisted the story, saying Keanu was using personal tragedy for publicity. It hurt him to see that, but he didn't respond. Instead, he told the team, "Truth doesn't need defense. It just needs patience." What the media didn't know was that the letter had more than one page. And on the second page was a name that none of his co-stars expected to see, a name that connected directly to one of them. That revelation would change everything, not just for Keanu, but for the entire cast. What began as a story about kindness was about to turn into a story about destiny. The name that changed everything the next morning arrived with a strange quietness. The crew moved around softly, setting up lights and cameras, but everyone felt distracted. They had all seen the behind-the-scenes video go viral overnight. The story of Keanu's letter had already reached millions of people. The world was talking about kindness, loss, and how one man's gentleness had brought warmth back into Hollywood. Yet on set, Keanu seemed even quieter than before. Something in his eyes showed that the story wasn't over, not for him. Liam noticed it first. During breakfast, Keanu sat near the window of the mountain lodge, looking out at the fog drifting across the hills. The letter was still with him, folded neatly, guarded as if it carried something too delicate for the world to see. After a long silence, Keanu called the director aside. "I need to talk to the cast," he said. The director nodded, sensing it was important. Soon, everyone gathered inside the main cabin, the actors, crew, even the producer. No one knew what was coming, but they could feel something deep was about to unfold. Keanu stood before them, holding the letter again. His voice was calm but heavy. "Yesterday, I told you part of what this letter said," he began. "But there's something I didn't share, something personal. something I wasn't ready to face. He opened the letter and unfolded the second page. The paper trembled slightly in his hand. He took a deep breath and continued. The woman who wrote this, the one who passed away, her name was Marie. And she wasn't just someone I used to know. She was my first co-star years ago in a small independent film. We lost touch after that movie. I didn't know she had a daughter. Everyone froze. Whispers filled the room. Keanu's eyes lifted slowly and settled on one person, Emily, the young actress who had joined the project only a few months earlier. She looked confused, her eyes wide, a soft tremor in her voice. "What do you mean?" she asked. Keanu's voice broke slightly as he said, "Her brother wrote that Marie had a daughter. Your mother's name was Marie, wasn't it?" The room fell completely silent. The only sound was the distant wind outside brushing against the glass. Emily's lips parted, but no words came. Her eyes filled with tears, and she slowly nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "My mother's name was Marie. She used to talk about you. She said you were the kindest person she ever met on a film." Everyone was stunned. Emily covered her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Keanu stepped closer, his voice soft, almost breaking. "She told me once that she wanted her daughter to grow up knowing that there are still good people in this world. I didn't know that daughter was standing right here beside me all this time." Emily shook her head in disbelief. "I had no idea you even knew her," she said through tears. "She never told me your full story. She just said there was someone who helped her believe again, someone she never forgot." Keanu gently handed her the letter. She took it with trembling hands, holding it to her chest. For a long moment, no one moved. Every person in that room could feel the weight of destiny, two people brought together again by the memory of a woman whose kindness had outlived her. Emily read parts of the letter aloud, her voice breaking between sentences. She wrote, "If you ever meet him again, tell him I'm grateful. Tell him his kindness gave me strength when I had nothing. And tell him my daughter is everything I hoped she would be." Keanu's eyes glistened. He closed them, taking a deep breath. "She was right," he said quietly. "You've become everything she dreamed of." The entire cast was in tears. Even the crew behind the cameras wiped their eyes. No one expected a film set to turn into something so real, so human. The director whispered, "This isn't just a movie anymore. This is life happening in front of us." After that day, something changed forever. The bond between Keanu and Emily grew stronger, not through fame or work, but through shared emotion. He became a mentor to her, guiding her gently through the ups and downs of acting, reminding her to carry her mother's light forward. In the following weeks, scenes between Keanu and Emily became breathtakingly real. Their performances felt alive with emotion. Every glance, every pause, every silence carried truth. The audience would later say that they could feel something in their scenes that went beyond acting. But while the world saw beauty, the truth behind it remained private. Only the cast knew the real story, how a single letter connected the past and present in ways no one could script. When the film wrapped up, the entire crew gathered one last time. The director spoke with emotion in his voice. "This project started as a story about redemption and kindness," he said, "but it became a mirror showing us what love really looks like when it's quiet, patient, and real." Keanu smiled gently, looking around the room filled with faces that now felt like family. "The world doesn't need bigger heroes," he said softly. "It just needs people who care enough to be kind." Emily reached out and held his hand, whispering, "You kept your promise to her." Keanu smiled with tears in his eyes. "No," he said, "we both did." Outside, the snow had begun to fall, light, quiet, endless. The cameras were off, but the moment was still cinematic. Everyone stood in silence, watching the two of them side by side, the weight of fate resting gently between them. What none of them knew was that Hollywood wasn't done watching. The story of the letter, the connection, and the emotional truth behind the film would soon reach the public in a way no one could predict, and it would test everything they had built together. When the world found out, it happened quietly at first. One of the assistant editors, while reviewing behind-the-scenes footage, noticed a short clip that no one else had seen. It showed Keanu handing the letter to Emily, both of them in tears. Their conversation wasn't audible, just a soft exchange under falling snow. The editor thought it was beautiful, a real moment that captured the soul of the project. Without realizing the depth behind it, he included 3 seconds of that clip in the film's promotional reel. 2 days later, the trailer went live. The internet exploded. Millions of people around the world watched it, replaying the brief shot of Keanu and Emily. Fans began asking questions. Who was the letter from? Why were they crying? Was it real? At first, the studio tried to brush it off as an emotional behind-the-scenes moment. But it didn't work. The story had already spread. Reporters started digging, connecting small details from old interviews and leaked posts. One outlet finally published an article titled, "Keanu Reeves Shares Emotional Moment with Co-Star, the Heartbreaking Story Behind the Letter." Within hours, every major entertainment network picked it up. Hashtags flooded social media. Thelator, kindness in Hollywood, Keanu and Emily. The cast gathered in the studio's conference room that morning. Emily sat quietly, staring at her phone, overwhelmed. She wasn't ready for the world to know that her mother's final letter had connected her to Keanu. She looked at him and whispered, "I didn't want this to become a story." Keanu nodded gently. "I know," he said. "Sometimes the truth finds its own way out. Maybe it's time the world sees that not every headline needs drama. Maybe they can see something real for once." The studio executives, however, weren't sure. One of them said, "We can use this to promote the movie. It's emotional. People will connect with it." Keanu looked up sharply, his tone steady but firm. "This isn't a marketing tool. It's someone's memory. It's her mother's love. Please don't turn that into a product." The room went silent. Even the executives lowered their eyes. No one argued with him again. Over the next few days, the world couldn't stop talking about it. Millions of fans shared their own stories, how Keanu's kindness had inspired them, how Emily's loss reminded them of their own. People began writing letters to strangers, leaving notes of encouragement in coffee shops, train stations, hospitals. Something rare was happening. Kindness was becoming viral. But with fame came the noise. Tabloids twisted facts, creating rumors that Keanu and Emily were secretly related or that the story was staged for publicity. The pressure grew unbearable. Paparazzi followed them everywhere. One evening, as they left a late-night talk show, a journalist shouted, "Is the story real or just another Hollywood trick?" Keanu stopped, turned, and said calmly, "If you have to ask what's real, maybe you forgot how to feel." Then he walked away, leaving cameras flashing behind him. That clip went viral too, not because of anger, but because of truth. Inside, though, Keanu was exhausted. Fame had a strange way of turning sincerity into spectacle. Emily, too, began struggling with the weight of attention. She missed her privacy, the peace she once had. One night they met at a quiet cafe away from the noise. Emily looked down, her voice shaking. "I wanted people to remember my mother for who she was, not as part of a story." Keanu nodded, his gaze gentle. "And they will," he said. "You know why? Because what she wrote wasn't about fame, it was about feeling. And the world is starving for that." A few days later, something unexpected happened. A handwritten letter arrived at the studio, addressed to both Keanu and Emily. It was from an elderly woman who lived in New York. Inside was a note that said, "I lost my husband last year. Your story reminded me that love doesn't end when people leave. It just changes where it lives." Reading it made them both cry. They realized that somehow, through all the chaos, their story had touched lives, quietly, deeply, and truthfully. Meanwhile, Hollywood couldn't stop reacting. Actors, directors, and producers began speaking openly about empathy on sets, respect for crew members, and emotional honesty in storytelling. Several filmmakers even started a small foundation inspired by Keanu's words, supporting struggling artists and crew workers in need. The name of the fund was the Small Things Project. But there was one more surprise waiting. During the film's premiere, as the lights dimmed and the audience watched in silence, the director had secretly added something new to the end credits, a dedication screen that read, "In memory of Marie, whose kindness built bridges between strangers and turned a story into a family." As the words appeared, the entire theater fell silent. Emily's eyes filled with tears. She turned to Keanu, who simply smiled and squeezed her hand. When the credits finished, no one clapped at first. They just sat still, wiping their eyes, absorbing what they had seen. Then slowly, applause began to build, soft at first, then thunderous. People stood up, cheering not just for a film, but for what it represented: truth, loss, and the quiet power of compassion. Afterward, as they walked outside into the cool night air, Emily looked at Keanu and said, "Do you think she saw this?" Keanu looked up at the stars. "Yes," he said softly, "and I think she's smiling." The world would continue talking about the film for months. Awards, interviews, debates, all followed. But for Keanu and Emily, the real victory wasn't fame. It was peace, the quiet knowing that they had kept a promise born out of love, loss, and fate. Still, one final twist awaited them, something that would bring the journey full circle, back to where it all began, proving once again that kindness never truly ends. The circle of kindness years passed. The film that began with a letter had become more than a movie. It was a memory carried in the hearts of millions. People still spoke about it, not because of its awards or fame, but because of how it made them feel. Schools used scenes from it to teach empathy, and even years later, strangers continued to leave handwritten letters for others, each one beginning with the same phrase, "Be kind," even when no one sees. Keanu had stepped back from the spotlight for a while. He spent more time traveling quietly, meeting people, supporting small charities, and helping those who reminded him of the crew he once worked beside. He no longer chased roles or headlines. He just lived simply, finding meaning in moments. His beard had grown grayer, his voice softer, but his eyes still carried the same quiet peace that had once transformed a film set into a family. Emily, on the other hand, had grown into one of the most respected young actresses in Hollywood. Not because of fame, but because of her soul. Every time she gave an interview, she mentioned the same two names, her mother, Marie, and the man who taught her that kindness was not weakness. She often said, "He didn't just teach me acting, he taught me how to be human." One quiet morning, Emily received a message from Keanu. It simply said, "There's somewhere I want to take you." No cameras, no reporters, no crew, just the two of them. They met in a small town near the ocean. The air was cool, filled with the sound of waves crashing gently on the shore. Keanu led her down a narrow path that opened into a small garden filled with white flowers and wooden benches. At the center stood a stone plaque that read, "For Marie and for everyone who still believes in gentle hearts." Emily froze. She covered her mouth, tears already falling. "You made this," she whispered. Keanu nodded. "We both did." Every act of kindness since that day, every letter people wrote, every stranger who helped another, it all came from her story. "This garden was built by the people who were touched by your mother's words. I just helped them find a place to keep her memory alive." Emily walked slowly through the garden, her fingers brushing the flowers, her heart heavy yet peaceful. She looked back at him. "You never stopped keeping your promise," she said softly. Keanu smiled faintly. "Neither did you." They sat on the bench together for a long time, watching the sun slowly rise over the ocean. The light touched the water like gold. Emily whispered, "You know, sometimes I still feel her near me. When I read scripts, when I'm tired, when I doubt myself, it's like she's still reminding me to keep going." Keanu looked toward the horizon. "That's because love doesn't disappear," he said. "It just changes form. Sometimes it becomes a person. Sometimes it becomes a moment. Sometimes it becomes a story." A light wind passed through the garden, rustling the flowers. It almost felt like a whisper, gentle, unseen, but deeply felt. Later that year, Emily started a small nonprofit foundation in her mother's name, helping young artists who couldn't afford acting school. She asked Keanu to be part of it, but he politely declined the spotlight. Instead, he quietly donated anonymously, just as he always did. When she insisted he take credit, he smiled and said, "It's not about who gives. It's about who receives hope." Time moved on, and years later, when Emily gave a speech at a film festival honoring her for her humanitarian work, she shared one final story. "A long time ago," she began, "a man received a letter that changed both our lives. It taught me that fate isn't random, it's a chain of hearts connected by kindness. He told me once that pain doesn't fade, it transforms. And today, I finally understand what he meant. Because out of pain, my mother's love became a bridge, one that still connects people, even strangers." The audience stood in silence, some wiping tears. She continued, "He may never say it himself, but the truth is, Keanu Reeves reminded the world that the greatest role any of us can play isn't in front of a camera. It's in the quiet kindness we show when no one is watching." After the speech, Keanu, sitting quietly in the back row, smiled faintly, his eyes shimmering. He didn't want recognition. He just felt grateful that the message had lived on not through fame, but through people who believed. As the night ended, he stepped outside, looking up at the stars. The air was cool, calm, and silent. For a moment, he imagined Marie's voice, soft, warm, filled with peace. "You kept your promise," she seemed to say. He smiled. "We all did," he whispered. And somewhere under the same sky, people he had never met were still passing kindness forward, holding open doors, leaving letters, smiling at strangers. Each act small, but together they formed something endless. Because in the end, the story wasn't about Hollywood or loss or fame. It was about something much simpler, a reminder that love, once given, never truly fades. It just keeps moving, from one heart to another forever.